Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. As always, we have really interesting things to talk about today. A federal judge on Friday overturned Wisconsin's ban on gay marriage. The big question now is, what happens? Of course, the story of the week is this absolutely bizarre and tragic story of the two 12-year-old girls in Waukesha who allegedly tried to stab their 12-year-old friend to death. We will also talk about the ongoing feud and heated words between Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke and Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisolm. And we will talk about the YMCA of Metro Milwaukee filing for bankruptcy. How did it ever get to this point? All right, let me introduce everyone before we get going. You know longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally, and education and employment consultant Gerard Randall, and of course Denise Callaway, communications and public relations professional. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, first let's talk about Wisconsin's ban on gay marriage, a constitutional amendment approved overwhelmingly by state voters back in 2006 who said marriage should be between a man and a woman. That's out. It's unclear now what happens. But would it be a horrible thing or a good thing if gay couples started flooding Wisconsin courthouses for marriage licenses tomorrow?
It'd be an excellent thing, and it's an excellent thing that's happening all across this country. I don't think anybody on either side of this question expected the change to be so quick and so dramatic all across the country, but it really has been. You know, it's sort of like when you find out, you know what, we can actually elect an African-American president in this country, or you know, the courts actually are going to uphold, you know, marriage equality and equal rights for all people in this country. I think one of the most impressive things is that by the time this gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, and of course it will, a majority of this country will be living in states, or a majority of states will be living in states where marriage equality exists, including Wisconsin. And an enormous majority of the population will be living in such states, of course, since, you know, New York and California and some of the largest states in the country have already approved it. But the thing is, it has been approved almost every which way you can possibly approve it, because voters have voted to approve it in their states. Republican federal judges and Democratic federal judges have voted to uphold the U.S. Constitution, to say that equality exists in the United States. You know, we are so used to seeing the Republican majority on the U.S. Supreme Court act in very partisan ways. But I've been really impressed that these federal judges, regardless of whether they were appointed by Ronald Reagan or George Bush or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, actually have tried to uphold the U.S. Constitution and uphold the ideal of equality in this country. And I'm overjoyed that Wisconsin is on that list now, and I think it's a settled question, really, and it's just a matter of time before it's the law of the land.
But it's also a strong possibility, isn't it, that the Supreme Court would say we're going to leave it up to the individual states?
I think that's where it's where it's heading back to. The issues of marriage and who has the ability to determine what's legal marriage in individual states has always been left to the individual states. And so my guess is that the courts will throw it back to the states, and that's where I think the point that Joel brought up, the number of states that have bought into it either through referendum or through constitutional amendment, or bought out of it, conversely. I think that's where the dynamic is going to shift. In Wisconsin, since the amendment, the constitutional amendment was passed that defined what marriage is, I think there will probably have to be another referendum of some type if that the current definition is going to stand. And frankly, I get a sense that in this state, as polarized as it is, it will be another hotly contested issue.
Denise, isn't it amazing how far we've come, even in our lifetimes? When we were kids, everybody hid if they were gay or not. Now we have a giant Pride Festival in Milwaukee this weekend.
Right. All
the states are approving gay marriage. Isn't that surprising how people change from one end of the spectrum to the other?
Well, I think what happened is, and I think a lot of credit goes to the gay community, is that people did start to come out of the closet. And you realized that people who happen to be gay have the same needs, desires, and wants that the heterosexual population does.
And they're people you know.
Right, and they're people you know. It's your uncle, it's your cousin, it's your brother, it's your sister. So I give a lot of credit to the gay community for doing that and showing that gay people are doing and wanting those same things in the community that everybody else does and everybody wants. And that includes the right to marry if they choose to do so. I think that the shift that we've seen in this state is phenomenal. I don't believe if that referendum were held today that it would pass. I truly don't believe that. The most recent polling showed that 55% of the people who responded in Wisconsin believe that people who are gay should have the right to marriage. They believe in marriage equality. Only 37% said they were opposed to it. I think it has been an incredible, swift shift. I mean, you have to remember, we are a state that has an openly gay senator, the only openly gay senator in the U.S. Senate. So I think the idea that somehow, should this need to go back to the citizens of Wisconsin to make a decision, I think we'd see a very different decision than we've seen before, and it's about time we get to come into the 21st century with the rest of the country.
All right, next topic. Let's talk now about the two 12-year-old girls in Waukesha County accused of trying to stab a 12-year-old friend to death in some sort of strange homage to an online fantasy character. They sit in jail on $500,000 bail while the victim faces a long and very painful road to recovery. So many questions. Were you surprised they were charged as adults and dragged before the TV cameras? Do they need treatment for a long time, punishment for a very long time, or both? And how in the world does any 12-year-old turn out like this? Not just one, but two.
I'm actually surprised at how much attention this story has been given to these two girls that did what I think is just a horrible thing. Especially given the way the press reports on crime in the communities of color. And this story has created such a sanitization of these girls' lives that if they were black, I honestly believe that they would be thrown to the wolves automatically. There would be hardly any talk about the psychological issues that perhaps they face or the family issues that may have contributed to their behaviors. There'd be none of that. And that's the part that saddens me the most. The thing that's fortunate for them is they will probably get a fairer shake than most others who commit similar kinds of crimes that don't get the benefit of the doubt, that won't have the opportunity to have good lawyers make their case that we ought to take a look at this as an issue of mental illness. We ought to take a look at this as one of those situations where had a family been more engaged in helping their child, perhaps this would never have occurred. None of that. I also think they're fortunate that the victim has survived so far. And because had it been a murder, I think all of these issues around whether or not these two girls should be sent to adult court, that would be settled. I think they actually stand a better chance of having this dealt with in the juvenile courts now because there's no death than it would have if it had been a murder.
I was surprised that you could charge a 12-year-old as an adult. I knew you could a 15 or a 16-year-old, but when they said the 12-year-olds are going to be charged as adults, I was surprised. But I heard the Waukesha DA on the radio today, and he said he was required by law to charge them as adults in this case.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't. That's an absurd statement for him to make. He's running for higher office, and he wants to wrap himself around this case, and that's an absurd statement. I agree. I understand everything Gerard said, and I agree that these girls are being treated differently than black children would be treated. But that is no excuse for treating any 12-year-old child as an adult because 12-year-olds are not adults. And charging them as adults so they could be, it's alleged that they could spend 65 years in prison for something they did at the age of 12 when their lives haven't even begun yet. Their brains aren't even formed yet. And yes, 12-year-old children have a lot of stupid ideas and a lot of strange ideas. And anyone who thinks that they know all the strange ideas children have doesn't know children very well, including possibly their own. But it is absurd to charge these children as adults. They are not adults. They're 12-year-olds. And they need love and care. And boy, you know, I've heard so much outpouring of sympathy for the victim in this case. I've heard very little outpouring of sympathy for these two children who also are victims in a sense, and certainly their families are victims. In fact, I hear that, you know, they talk about talk radios beating up on these children's families as if there's something wrong with these families because of what these children did. I'm sure those families are as heartbroken as anyone would be if this were their 12-year-old daughter. You know, it is, I can agree with Gerard, but I can also say I know the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel has long had a policy of not identifying juveniles involved in crimes except when they want to. And in this case, because it was a sensational case, not only are they identifying these two kids, but they're putting enormous pictures of them on the front page, being brought into court in handcuffs and chains, just because it's a prurient interest kind of picture. And the reason you don't identify children involved in crimes is before someone is of an age of reason or understanding of the effects of what they're doing. And you can say, boy, no one could believe that this wouldn't have the effects it has had. It's a horror. It's a horror crime. But believe me, the district attorney says, well, if I charge them as juveniles, they could only be held until they're 25 years old. When they're 25 years old, they are not going to be who they are now. They are not going to be children who actually considered murdering and tried to murder a friend of theirs and both took part in it because some fantasy creature, they were going to walk 200 miles to the Nicolay Forest.
But there are
so
some who
different.
think that
is really
based on what these girls allegedly did, they should never see freedom again.
I think that this is, I got to tell you, I think that, I hardly ever disagree with you, but I'm going to disagree with you on this case. I do think we have to ask, where the heck were the parents on this? And the answer is, some of the parents, no, that's not true. Some of the parents, the father of one of the girls, was well aware of her fascination with Slender Man, and he actually had the same fascination. So did her brother. I do think that you do have to say, as an adult at whatever age her father is, as an older person at whatever age her brother is, you make those decisions about what's right. I don't know any parent in their right mind who thinks that it's okay for a 12-year-old to have this kind of fascination with a site that promotes death and dying and torture, and that is wrong. And I do think it's absolutely right to ask where the parents are. But let me just finish, because I am appalled at, to me, what is the stark difference and the way that this is being covered compared to just the other tragedy we have involving a young woman who's also fighting for her life, Sierra Guyton. We had stories in the Journal-Sentinel that called one of the young men feral. Yeah. He, and if you believe that, it's because he got no guidance and no instruction at home. That is exactly what happened with these girls. They planned this for a year. This is not some little fantasy that came into their heads. This is something they worked on and planned for a year. It is ignorance and it is stupid, but it is still something where you have to hold someone accountable for what happened to this young woman. And I'd say, as culpable as these two 12-year-olds are, so are their families. If this would have happened in the African-American community, you can bet, because it has happened, people said, where are the parents? Where are the parents? What were the parents doing? Where were the parents of these girls?
We say it on this show all the time.
They have a responsibility to make sure that their 12-year-old children are not exposed to things that are harmful. And not only were they exposed to these things that were harmful, they were exposed to them again and again and again, and over a period of a year, plan to murder another person. That you have to have a penalty for that.
Okay, let me just say,
So
and I'm agreeing with you too, just as I agreed with Gerard, that yes, black children would be treated in a horror. I hate to think what black children in this
We've
situation.
seen it happen in this community.
But what you're saying, where were the parents because these children were interested in horror stories? I can tell you children who are interested in horror stories. I was when I was a child. My children were when they were children. My grandchildren were when they were children. And this whole idea that somehow stories created this situation, no, they didn't. I mean, people know the difference between horror stories. They're some of the most popular stories among all elementary school children.
This wasn't just a horror story. These girls were fascinated with this website. They went back to the website again and again and again and again.
You're absolutely right, but that's not the fault of the stories.
It was real. They felt it was real.
Right.
Where is some kind of adult intervention and guidance on the part of their parents?
And they need care, and we don't know that their parents did not show them love and care.
It's not a question of whether or not they showed them love and care, but they sure didn't give them any kind of guidance in terms of saying this is not the type of thing.
Horror stories.
Well, it's not reading horror stories. My kids read Goosebumps. That's not it. This is not Goosebumps. This is not Edgar Allan Poe. This is a website that encourages, talks about, and fantasizes extremely violent acts and actually says, if you want to be part of the Slender Man group, you need to kill somebody. Goosebumps never did that.
All right, let's talk now about the ongoing but escalating feud between Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke and Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisolm. Clarke portrays himself as tough on crime and wants Chisholm's office to stop offering so many suspended sentences and plea bargains. Chisolm says Clarke is just grandstanding and knows full well that these are legal and necessary tools of our criminal justice system today.
Boy, right after this last discussion, I'll tell you this. I think both have misrepresented the position of the other, and both should be ashamed of themselves. I'm a huge fan of Sheriff Clarke's. I really am. I consider him a good friend. And I also understand that this is election season. But I have heard what Chisolm has said about Clarke, and I've heard what Clarke has said later that was a misrepresentation of what Chisolm has responded to, and I'm just very disappointed in both. I will accept that for those of us who believe that judges may have stretched their authority way too much in the use of plea bargains, and because plea bargains in reality have really become more of a tool to expedite justice as opposed to ensuring that real justice is met out. And in that sense, I think the sheriff is right. On the other hand, I don't want to tie the hands up of judges who really need to have some discretion when they're applying the law in all these different situations, because then you don't get justice. What you get is a play-by-the-book kind of standard that doesn't fit in every situation that comes before a judge or a jury.
Isn't that what Clarke is pushing for, though? More of a play-by-the-book. Okay, you do this crime, you're going to prison for 2 years.
No,
We're not going to negotiate.
Yeah. He's not pushing for anything. He's just drawing attention to himself as a tough guy who disagrees with every other elected official and every other law enforcement official in this town. He sits on, as in fact John Chisolm pointed out, he sits on a community justice committee, which includes the mayor and the county executive and the police chief and the chief judge and the district attorney and my wife. She happens to be the public representative on that. And Sheriff Clarke has actually written letters to the federal government saying don't grant any federal grants to these people to improve the criminal justice system in Milwaukee County. He's taken absurd positions. Every other law enforcement official in this county is trying to do something to address the biggest problem in law enforcement in this county, which is that we incarcerate more African-American males than any other jurisdiction in the United States, and it's like twice the national average. And if we don't let judges have some discretion, it will only get worse and it will never get better.
Isn't one of the reasons, though, that Clarke keeps getting elected over and over again is because people do like him and they do agree with him?
Well, I'm not going to try to guess why that happens. But I do believe that Sheriff Clarke has a job to do. And his job is a very different job than John Chisholm's job. He doesn't face the kind of pressures that the City of Milwaukee police chief does. He doesn't have nearly the crimes to investigate. He doesn't have nearly the number of incidents to investigate, the number of arrests to make, or the number of trials where his deputies have to appear and to state their case before a judge and jury. I don't think that anybody has ever called, perhaps other than Sheriff Clarke, has ever called John Chisolm tough on crime. He's not, someone who's soft on crime. He is somebody who's been very tough on crime. He has a different, he's a straight arrow guy. What he has done is he's taken a different approach to figuring out how we address long-term some of these issues of crime in our community, and particularly folks who have fallen into the criminal justice system. How do we address that? I don't believe, and certainly we see this happen in other counties where there aren't as many people of color, that every crime that can put someone in jail is a crime where someone deserves to be put in jail. He's taken a look at alternative sentences. He has his DEAs right in the district stations to address issues and problems that come up. He's looked at restorative justice. These are the things we need to do. The last time I checked, when we sentence someone or find someone guilty of a crime, it is not simply about punishing them. It's also about figuring out ways to rehabilitate them. And I think that John Chisolm has been creative and in some ways bold, taking a look at those opportunities and those promises. And, we're running out of space in prison to put black men in Milwaukee. So we do have to figure out something else that's
One
different.
quick note, though. The Journal tried to make the case that the sheriff and his opinions are irrelevant. And I think that's just tragic that they would even hold to that view. For the very fact that you had just mentioned, he continues to get reelected by large margins.
He's brought them to that with inflammatory policies, encouraging people to harm themselves, doing things that are dangerous.
Fear.
But he's not irrelevant.
No, he's not.
All right. We only have a minute, so we have to talk about the YMCA. How in the world did that organization, after 100 years, get into this deep of trouble?
I think expansion of turf and expansion of programming that didn't have a sustainability program.
Did they try to do too much?
They tried to compete with suburban health clubs and this whole private health club industry, which has health clubs all over the place. And now that they're returning to their urban mission, I think that's exactly what they should do.
Do they need to survive? Does the organization need to survive?
Absolutely. It absolutely needs to survive. It's returning to its urban mission. I think they're also going to be able to find that it's much easier for them to fund these programs that they have that really go back to the core work that the Y was doing. It's going to be tough, but they're going to survive this, and I think it's going to be a stronger organization in the end.
All right. Well, it's Friday today. Barack Obama must be under attack from Republicans. Of course, that was also true on Tuesday and Wednesday and last week and the week before that. Now the GOP may be genuinely mad at the president for the prisoner trade that got an American POW released by the Taliban. But Rick Horowitz thinks he also sees a method to their madness. Rick.
Yeah, GOP Tactical. This is Mullins. Hey, how you doing? How's it going? Yeah, fine. Couldn't be better. Uh-huh. Oh, you saw it? What'd you think? Yeah, we're really jamming the news hole, right? Oh, totally. They're totally on the defensive. Yeah, he had us worried there for a minute that that VA thing was pretty funny. We were all over him because he wasn't getting rid of Shinseki. Yeah, exactly. Dumped him quicker than we ever figured. You know how he hates to get rid of one. Yeah, right. So we had to do one of those insta pivots, getting rid of Shinseki won't solve anything. It's still Obama's Well, that's the thing. We weren't expecting it so soon. We didn't have all the interviews lined up. Sure, but then he handed us this POW thing. What's his name? Bergdahl, whatever. Obama lets terrorists loose to get this guy back? How's that? Yeah, well, that's when we thought he wasn't trying to get the guy out. Of course, we were pounding him on that. Yeah, even McCain, he was all for a deal. Just get the guy out, trade, invade, something. If you know John. Right, but only until they did get him out, then we went straight to criticizing it. Maybe he's a deserter. What about his father's beard? They're negotiating with terror. Exactly. Huh? Consistency? Absolutely. Obama wants it, we're against it. Obama did it, something's wrong with it. Can't be more consistent than that, right? Anyway, it's total news hole domination. They can't get a word in edgewise. No, not a word, not a word. Not the good jobs numbers, not the G7, not the healthcare signups. They're what, at 8 million already? Anybody talking about that? Nah. When it dies down? Not for a while yet. Then we'll start the hearings. What? No way. This one, look, trust me, this one's got legs. If it doesn't, hey, we'll always have Benghazi. Right, see, feel better now? Yeah, I told you, it's not going to be a problem. Yeah, we got it.
All right, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.